what we want to see from the Chancellor on Wednesday is an absolute determination to protect jobs and businesses in the UK and to secure our recovery. That must be at the front of the Chancellor's mind, not any party political considerations about what's best for the Conservative Party at the next general election, but he needs to focus on what's right for our country right now to secure that recovery.
There are lots of reports that Rishi Sunak is going to be increasing corporation tax, something that you've said that you won't support. Why is it then that you don't want to see a rise in corporation tax now, but in 2019 you stood as a shadow Treasury Minister on a manifesto calling for higher corporation tax?
Well, look, over the last 10 years, the Conservatives have pulled our country further and further away from the mainstream on corporation tax, and actually that's not resulted in additional investment. We've seen investment actually being raised at a lower level in the UK compared to many other countries. What the Conservatives are doing now, though, isn't setting out that long-term plan to rebalance our tax system. In fact, they're kicking the can down the road when it comes to business rates reform. What they seem to be focused on doing, particularly the Chancellor, is trying to get any tax changes out of the way quickly, get them out of the way so that they can then have a general election when they can cut taxes. Now, instead, they should be focused all of the time on building jobs and businesses in our country so we can secure that economic recovery. You know, the UK's had the worst economic crisis of any major economy. They should be focused on setting that right, not on party political considerations.
Nice answer. The question that I actually asked, though, was about whether or not why it was that Labour used to think that higher corporation tax was a good thing and now you don't.
Well, with respect, I just said that we would welcome that longer-term debate around corporation tax. I just said that it has been concerning to see how the Conservative Party has pulled us away from the mainstream on corporation tax. But why are they focused on this now? Why are they focused on increasing council tax directly for families right now? They're focused on it because the Chancellor has said to his MPs that he wants to get tax changes out of the way now so they can have a clear run-through to the next general election. Instead, they should be focused on promoting our economy, securing that recovery. Yes, let's have that long-term discussion about tax, particularly to protect our high street businesses. But let's not pretend that the Conservative Party is doing this right now because they want to secure our recovery. It seems to be driven by party political considerations.
So if Rishi Sunak does propose higher corporation tax, Labour's going to support that, vote in favour of it?
If we see a long-term plan for getting our country to a better place on corporation tax, particularly one which faces up to that enormous gulf in taxation for businesses based in bricks compared to businesses based on the internet, of course we will look carefully at that. But what we don't want to see right now is what the Chancellor is doing, particularly in relation to council tax, the imposition of additional costs right now at a point when our country is experiencing the worst economic crisis of any major economy.
So if there's a long-term plan for corporation tax, you'll look carefully at that. Does that mean you'll vote in favour of higher corporation tax?
Well, we need to look at how this would be rolled out. We need to make sure that it would be a plan that would actually make sense for British business. We've got to be doing all we can to protect jobs and businesses right now. But as I mentioned before, one of the really big problems with the UK tax system is that big gulf between how businesses based on our high streets are taxed and their business rates are a huge problem. The Chancellor's kicking the can down the road around business rates reform. Now, it's not going to happen, apparently, until the autumn. That big gulf between those businesses and businesses that are largely based on the internet, where corporation tax is more relevant. Of course, not just the rate of corporation tax, but those enormous loopholes that the Conservatives have allowed to develop over the last 10 years. So we would look at any plan very carefully, but we're saying very directly to the Chancellor now, please don't be following party politics for this budget. Follow what is in the interests of our country and its economic recovery.
You mentioned there about the high streets and the gulf between online retailers and high street retailers during the pandemic. Does that mean you would support any taxes aimed at online companies?
Well, we've seen a lot of kite flying from the government around this issue, and we haven't seen yet any concrete proposals. Their digital services tax really isn't the kind of robust change that we need to see to level that playing field. So we would look at any proposals very carefully, but it's so important that they do start to level that playing field. We've got businesses really suffering on the high street. The government's planning changes are actually going to make that worse. I was astonished to hear the Chancellor say that they would improve the situation. They could lead to a wholesale sell-off of our high streets. So we really do need to be getting this right for the future.
Your predecessor, John McDonnell, told this show last week that he'd like to see a windfall tax on companies who have profited from the pandemic, banks, property developers, tech companies. Would you support a windfall tax?
Well, actually, I'm sorry to sound like a stuck record, but I believe what the government should be focused on doing right now is on protecting jobs and businesses. Of course, there can and should be a discussion into the future about the nature of taxation. But, you know, we have suffered the worst economic crisis of any major economy in the UK. And we're unique in another way that we're the only country that right now has a debate focused on increasing tax, particularly on families. That's the wrong thing to be doing right now. Absolutely, let's have that discussion for the future about taxation. But right now, let's please have a budget that's focused on jobs and businesses.
You're talking a lot about debate and discussion in the future. I'm just trying to get a sense of what you would do right now. Are there any tax rises in this budget that you would support?
Well, with respect, what I would be doing right now if I were Chancellor is being focused on securing the recovery. What he should have done, in fact, not right now, but many
on tax rises.
He should have been clear about the. Well, sorry, he should have been clear about the continuation of business rates, about the continuation of the VAT reduction. He should have a clear roadmap for the future of wage support and reform that system, because, you know, we can have the Chancellor talking about how he would tax different forms of economic activity, but if the tax base is shrinking, as it is right now, then that discussion is really at one remove from securing our recovery. That is what he should be focused on.
So you seem to be saying that right now it should be focused on spending, on supporting people during the pandemic. Are you worried at all about the state of the public finances? Clearly the Chancellor has got his eye on that. Are you worried about debt levels?
Well, of course, they're a concern. Right now, we do have very low interest rates, but it's not necessarily the case that that would continue forever. So we do need to have a sensible approach to this. But, you know, we've got to focus on that size of the tax base. You know, how many people are in work, how many businesses are operating. Right now, we've seen that tax base shrinking. We've seen record redundancies. And so it's really important that we build that economic activity back up. That's what's happening in other countries. And really, the UK is well out of the mainstream now with the Chancellor's approach.
So you don't seem to support tax rises. You also seem to want more spending, and you're worried about the public finances. It sounds a bit like cake and eat it, a bit Boris Johnson.
Well, no, that's not right, because we want to see a much more targeted approach. First of all, we've seen billions of pounds wasted by the government during this crisis. The Chancellor at no point has said that he would crack down on that waste. So it's really important that we do tackle it. But secondly, we also need to see a much more targeted approach from government. If you look at the business rates holiday, for example, in England, that's been provided to every retailer, including the very biggest essential retailers. That's been giving them support that many simply did not need. In Labour-run Wales, they've had a much more targeted approach. That's ensured that actually support has got to where it's needed. So let's talk about having a targeted approach. Let's stamp out that waste and mismanagement. And if we did that, then this crisis wouldn't be proving as costly as it is under the Conservatives.
OK, just finally, I asked Rishi Sunak at the end of the interview about Shamima Begum, the Bethnal Green schoolgirl who, of course, left the UK to join Islamic State. Do you think it's right that she hasn't been allowed back to the UK to contest that decision to strip her of her British citizenship?
Well, we've had that Supreme Court judgment. Of course, it was a complicated judgment, but we respect that judgment. We respect the rule of law.